about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I wanna know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about. Let's talk about. Yeah. Let's talk about conversations with Nicole.
Greetings. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host, and this is what I call Wellness Wednesday. Wellness Wednesday. This is an opportunity for you and me and my guests to have a conversation. And today's topic is on suicide. We have been talking to Black and Brown clinicians around mental health and wellness, trying to normalize the conversation of mental health and wellness in Black and Brown communities. So I'm inviting you all to tag a friend, like, comment, share. This is an interactive live conversation, and my guest is ready to talk to you. So, before we get started, I definitely want to hear from you. So, for those of you who are joining us on Facebook and on YouTube, if you will, enter in the comments the city and state that you are tuning in from, so we can give you a shout out. I see some of you chiming in. So, my godmom down in Miami, Corliss, thank you for tuning in. And the chief, Terrell, is here in Tallahassee. Thank you for tuning in, Chief. So, Chief, tell them they need to tune in. Tag somebody. Let them know they need to be right here with us because we are going to be talking around suicide and how to support someone who is considering suicide. So, this is not a this is a heavy topic. But we are covering it every month, at least once a month, because it's something that we need to be talking about. Suicide numbers have been increasing, especially amongst Black boys and men and just youth, girls, teenagers, adolescents, young adults. And so I actually was in a space today, at a restaurant today, and a friend of mine said that they had lost someone who was like a mentee to them last night. Yeah, I'm overwhelmed even talking about it. But death by suicide, young Black woman, dancer, early 20s, and you just, yeah. So at any rate, we're gonna talk about it. So I see Mr. Maine. What you doing in Texas, Maine? Thanks for tuning in. And Sabrina in Tallahassee, thank you for tuning in. All right, so again, we are live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Greater Works Network, which is our network on Roku TV. So we welcome everybody. All right. So my guest, I actually connected with him through a very old friend, not old from the standpoint of age, but someone that I've been knowing for quite some time, Dr. Paula Lewis, who is from Miami, and she is a child psychologist. So my guest is a child psychologist as well, but he does a number of other things. I told him he cheated me on this bio, but I'm going to read it anyway. So Charles A. Barrett, Dr. Charles A. Barrett, is a coordinator for diagnostic and psychological services with the London County Public Schools. Additionally, he is an adjunct lecturer at Northern Virginia Community College, the Graduate School of Education at Howard University, the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University, and the Department of Psychology at Millersville University. So Needless to say, he likes to teach, okay? An award winning educator for his commitment to students, families, schools, and communities. Charles has held various leadership positions with the National Association of School Psychologists and frequently speaks to a variety of professional and lay audiences about promoting positive outcomes for children. To learn more about Charles, including his books, you can go to his website, which I did yesterday and was like, whoa, look at all of these things that he is doing. www.charlesbarrett.org. So help me welcome. He told me don't call him doctor, just call him Charles. Dr. Charles.
Good evening. Thank you,
Yay!
Nicole. Great to be here.
So glad to have you. So tell
Yes.
the peoples, not what you do, but who is Dr. Charles Barrett, who we're gonna just call
Yeah.
Charles tonight. You see how
Charles.
you just
Always
got Charles on
Charles.
the name. He
Always
said he was
Charles.
born Charles, so he's just Charles. So tell the
That's
people
right.
who is Charles.
Who is Charles? Charles is I really want to frame this as, again, who I am as a person. Certainly you heard what I do as a school psychologist and teaching different undergraduate and graduate courses, but really at the center of who I am is trying to communicate hope and wholeness to everybody. If that's kids I work with in school, if that's families I'm supporting, with their children in school, if that's graduate students, other professionals, I'm really about communicating hope and wholeness in everything that I do, writing, school psychology, teaching, sharing with you tonight. I want to encourage you, whoever you are listening, whatever you're going through, but even those of us, and we all know people who are going through certain, challenging times. We are living in challenging times in this country, in the world. So that's who I am. And all those things that you heard about, the writing, the teaching, the music, it's all about hope and wholeness. So that's who I am at my core. And I hope to even convey that as we engage tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So, how did you get involved in psychology and counseling?
Yeah, so quick story, 'cause I can talk about this all day, but quick
That's
story.
why we'll take the quick story.
I went to undergrad, St. John's in New York. From New York, I live now in suburban DC in Virginia, but went to undergrad as a speech pathology and English major. Always loved to write, and by 11th grade in high school, I knew that I wanted to work with kids. I knew that I was going to work in some capacity with children. I'll say this as well. I am a lifelong stutterer. I've been saying that about the last year, kind of embracing who I am. So I went in as a speech major because I was myself was in speech therapy for 6 years, all through elementary school, middle school. So if I didn't become a high school English teacher, I was going to become a speech pathologist to help kids like me. And always want to recognize my elementary speech pathologist, Valerie Schwinger. We still talk to this day. We spoke about 2 weeks ago. Just fabulous lady who helped me so much with my speech. So went to college, speech and English major, and like many students, money is an issue. So basically, I got a scholarship to do research, and psychology was one of the disciplines that qualified for this scholarship. Um, Ended up studying with a clinical child and school psychologist, and at the end of undergrad, still not really sure if I wanted to be a child psychologist or go into teaching and maybe become a principal or a superintendent eventually. And he told me, this guy named Raymond DiGiuseppe, he told me about school psych, saying that it's the best of both worlds. It's kids, it's psychology, and I think you'll like it. So here I am now. I've been in the field 14 years, went to graduate school and studied, and now again serving for 14 years as a school psychologist and love it. So I kind of fell into it, but I knew that I wanted to work with kids and I wanted to work in school. So here we are, and never regretted it one day in my life.
Nice, nice, nice,
Yeah.
nice. Wow. Yeah, it takes a special person to work with youth.
Nothing like it. Nothing like it.
Okay. And you're at you do adjunct professorship at 5 universities?
Yeah, but I'm not there at the same time, so it's a little misleading. So
Okay,
now
gotcha.
I'm at Millersville this semester. I was at Nova, the community college, last semester. I'll
Okay.
be at Mason in the summer, so it overlaps sometimes. But
Okay, got it.
all those people, but not all at the same time. So
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. So which do you prefer, the college students or the grade school students?
oh, grade school for sure, for sure.
Really?
Yeah, I'm an elementary guy. If I can
Okay.
do kindergarten to second grade all day, that's my favorite. I've served high school, served middle school, but my favorite age is between 5 and 8. I just love
Wow.
it. Yeah. Little
Wow.
little guys are good. They're really interesting, and it's really about prevention. It's really about trying to kind of keep them from going down a certain path and
Right.
preventing the mental health difficulties that we'll get into tonight, I'm sure. So
Gotcha.
yeah, I'm a little guy. Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool. 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 All right. Well, before we get started, I got to read my disclaimer because we
absolutely.
don't want anybody to think this is therapy, even though I
Right.
know it might be, self care and
Correct.
some good stuff here, but
Exactly right.
no. All topics, past, present, and future, on Conversations with Nicole are for informational purposes only. They are not to be used as a diagnosis for treatment or an answer to any personal issues related to the topic being discussed before, during, or after the program. So I said it.
Absolutely. Thank
All
you for
right.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do want people to connect with counselors and therapists. So we
Mm,
definitely encourage you to do that. If you have an issue, that's part of what this is all about.
for
So,
sure. For
yes.
sure.
All right. So let's dive in. So, how can we support someone considering suicide? So let's talk about kind of. I, I was doing some research and it was talking about suicide. There being like a passive um, form of suicide where there are some thoughts around or ideation, I guess, around it, but not really knowing kind of how to carry it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I'm kind of I want this to be real organic, but I'm kind
Sure.
of it's heavy. So help me
Sure.
out, Charles. Help me
Sure.
out.
Yeah, so I would say even before we get to the ideation and the plan and the attempts, I think it's really important that we frame suicide as really the outcome or the result of underlying, typically untreated mental health difficulties. So more than 90% of people who die by suicide have some type of diagnosable mental health condition. Could be depression, could be anxiety, could be bipolar, schizophrenia, just a number of mental health conditions. And that really is one of the most significant risk factors for attempting and also dying by suicide. So I think before we get into the actual discussion about suicide, I think one of the biggest preventative measures we can do is to really talk about the necessity of good mental health and what that looks like. How can we achieve that? How can we support people in their mental health? So, certainly in the Black community, there's so much that I think we experience in our views on mental health, be that just purely cultural or racial, be that kind of the intersection of Black and our faith and just a whole number of things. But I would say that one of the best things we can do is to promote mental health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not an absolute kind of construct, meaning that I am or I'm not, but it really exists along a continuum. And it's really the degree to which I'm experiencing mental health and wellness versus not. So, and that can change over time with different life stressors, a whole host of things. So, I do think the discussion should start with how do we just engage in healthy mental health, and have some ideas around that. But suicide is real, but
Mm-hmm.
suicide in most cases doesn't just come up out of the blue. There have been some, warning signs and all those things that we can also engage in. But I think the mental health topic, if we had a better handle on that, then I think in turn we have a better handle on preventing suicide.
Absolutely. So you talk about, I guess, like a spectrum of sorts.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And where folks might be on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I think, definitely because as I was having this conversation today with the person who told me about their friend that did this. They both of us were just kind of baffled in terms of what's going on
Mm-hmm.
in their minds. And so, we were talking about like different things that you do to kind of cope, you
Mm-hmm.
know, healthy options of
Yeah,
cope, because there are some unhealthy coping mechanisms
absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely.
But, turning to those things that help get you through,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's, music or um, connecting with nature or journaling or
Yeah.
talking to a friend or, you know, exercise or, you know, going to get a massage or just, you know, there are a number of things that
Mm-hmm.
help kind of mitigate that. But of course, it all starts in the mind. So,
Mm-hmm.
changing those recordings, I think, one of the things that tends to happen is that there's a recording of inadequacy or lack or fear or doubt or unbelief or whatever it is that just keeps playing over and over and over and over and over again. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you, stop that recording?
Yeah, yeah. I
Hmm.
think one of the things, and all those things that you mentioned, Nicole, are healthy, are helpful, and going to be different for each person, of course. But I would say one of the things that we can do, and it's kind of a cliche, but we have to normalize mental health and not view it as something that I only go to a therapist or I only go to a counselor when I'm feeling bad. We have this such a disconnect between mental health and physical health, and they're really just part and parcel of the same thing. So I think that most people should. I mean, we don't always, but most people would agree that it's important to go to your doctor for your yearly physical, for your a checkup or whatever kids do or adults do. And I think we have to really get to a place as a people, as a culture, as a society more broadly, that we are valuing mental health checkups just like we promote physical health checkups, and just talking to someone about how you feel. This idea that I'm crazy or something wrong with me or I'm weak. Those ideas are just not helpful for people who really could benefit, and that's all of us could benefit from just talking to someone. As a psychologist, several years ago, probably I don't know, 8 years ago, I went to counseling myself, and
Mhm.
I enjoyed it. I mean, it was like this is great. And kind of being on the other side of the table, kind of being the client and not the provider, gave me such great perspective. But it was really healthy for me, if for nothing else. Good counseling, good mental health and wellness, from a trained professional, is going to at least validate what you're feeling. Not that it's right or wrong, but at least hear
Mhm.
yourself say it out loud and
Right.
get some feedback on, I'm not the only one that hears this, or I'm not, again, crazy for thinking that my feelings don't matter. So I
Mhm.
really think that for nothing else, you owe it to yourself for someone to validate that is real to you. And that can be a huge part of healing, of wholeness, for people. Just so really, I want us to normalize going to a trained provider, mental health provider, counselor, psychologist, therapist, whatever you want to call them. That is so important, again, to prevent getting to a place of feeling overwhelmed. There's no way out, and suicide seems to be my only recourse.
That's really profound. I hadn't really thought about that, how healing it might be to be validated
Mm-hmm.
in that way, but that makes a lot of sense. So I'm gonna pause here and I'm
Sure.
gonna get the audience involved. So I want
Absolutely.
to know how many of you, if your insurance provider or maybe it's affordable cares, um, you know, health insurance, if they provided a counseling session annually, like you get your annual physical, you get a annual checkup from the neck up, how many of you would go? Let me know. Give me a church finger or wave your hand or thumbs up or something. Let me know. If you were able to get a free counseling session, like you do your, I say free, but if your insurance provider offered free counsel or an annual counseling session, like they do a annual checkup, how many of you would go? All right, we got quite a few hands coming up. All right, Terrell, thank you. Marjorie, thanks for being here. Appreciate you. Okay, that's my sister Shayla. Thank you for being here, Shay. My mom, hey, okay. Miss T said she would. Okay, so a number of people would. All right, so we need to work on that, Charles.
I think it's a great question. I'm also encouraged by the responses. I think that the larger issue, and I was just talking to some students about this on Monday evening. There's so many obstacles, so many kind of barriers of access and opportunity that systems can do better at providing, again, those options for people. So
Yeah.
we blame people or we pathologize people, for not being more mentally well or having better
Mhm.
mental health, but we also don't provide the vehicle for them to have access to those services. So I think about it in the same way that we have these food deserts and in certain urban areas or certain communities, and then we blame people for their obesity or for their heart disease, but look at what their options are to have
Mhm.
access to healthy food. So the same thing goes for mental health. If we don't change how systems operate and really provide better opportunities to get quality mental health, like we again prioritize physical health, we I don't think we'll make the headway that we need to really have in this area. The other thing I'm always trying to integrate issues of faith. I do think our community organization, so if that's your church, your temple, your mosque, whatever your belief system may be, I do think there's a way for them to also become partners, to provide better access to mental health, and just so much that can be done in different levels. But I did want to highlight that, we can't blame people for the state of their lives when oftentimes that's a function or a product of larger systemic issues that are just injustices.
Absolutely. Well, you said a whole word there. I'm challenged with that
Yeah,
in my job because I'm actually serving as behavioral health navigator
yeah,
for the county health department here. And I definitely, I experienced it today.
yeah.
Somebody that I referred to um, uh, um, for service,
Hmm.
right? Free services at that. And when
Hmm.
they called, they were told that they didn't, they weren't basically they weren't eligible.
Mm.
Like, how are you gonna do that?
Yeah, yeah.
And so they called me and was telling me about it. And they basically were trying saying that no, this wasn't for you,
Mm.
and there's a waiting list. And I know there's not a waiting list. I know there's not a waiting list. It's already
Mhm.
hard enough for people to call for counseling, and
Correct.
you gonna turn them away?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was so hot,
Yeah,
Charles.
I
Boy.
believe it. I believe it. I believe it. Through COVID, I've always said that, COVID didn't create inequities or create issues, but COVID certainly exacerbated a number of existing issues. So just, I think it was even more evident that just how disjointed this mental health system that we have in this country is, and how hard it is to get access and services. Working for a public school system, I know that everyone's overwhelmed now in schools and in the community, but it is next to impossible to find providers who are taking new clients. So you have kids who need support, who need help, but who is really available to really get them what they need. So just a multifaceted issue, but we can do better, and we have to do better, with providing those services to those who need it.
Absolutely. So there are folks chiming in. Miss T, hey there. She said that she believes if you work for the state of Florida, you can get up to 6 free sessions. So that's good
Excellent.
to know.
Yeah.
Marjorie said at my last job, they would literally only provide covered services if the employee had a breakdown. It's
Hmm.
definitely not preventative methods, but delayed efforts, which is horrible.
Absolutely.
So we got to work to change that.
Yeah.
My sister Shay said there are things getting checked during a physical health checkup. So what would be looked for during a mental health checkup?
Great question. Great questions. So I think it's things like what are your coping mechanisms when you do feel overwhelmed? Like, so do you have an outlet? Do you have a way to process, those feelings? Sometimes there are also physical signs that may not stem from a physical ailment or kind of underlying issue. So for example, we call it in psychology somatization or somatic complaints, soma being the Latin for body. So maybe there's muscle aches, other body aches, stomach aches, headaches. Those can actually stem from underlying mental health conditions. So if you're reporting these physical symptoms, but there's no kind of underlying physical cause, that could be another indication that maybe your mental health is somewhat compromised, and that's something to look into. But I think about just kind of how do you feel, like kind of general stress levels? Do you feel overwhelmed? Are you easily frustrated, easily angered? How do you respond to this kind of typical day-to-day stressors? Do those slight things kind of give you significant difficulty in bouncing back? So all those are those things I think providers can ask as indications of, well, maybe you are a bit overwhelmed and maybe need to talk to someone to kind of help process what those feelings are. No psychologist, no therapist, no counselor has the answer, and I want to make that very clear that people don't go to counseling to get the answer, but they go to counseling to be supported through a process, because a lot of these circumstances are very complicated. So sometimes folk want to be told, well, what do I do? And it's really no clear answer sometimes, but I can give you some strategies, some tips, some techniques. But ultimately, it's really my job to support you through that process, work with you, as you're learning new ways of thinking, new ways of coping. But those are just some quick ideas about some questions or indications that your mental health could be somewhere compromised. I think about kids, 'cause that's certainly been my experience. And sometimes when children are easily angered or they're aggressive, maybe easily irritated, all those things, it looks like things like ADHD sometimes, or it looks like these externalizing conditions, but sometimes that can be a manifestation of underlying depression. So it really just kind of takes a professional to kind of go in and assess and look for these things. But those are just some of the types of questions that could be asked to give a sense of how people's functioning is occurring at that time.
Absolutely. So Marie said just what I was going to say about behaviors.
Hmm.
That you'll notice maybe that somebody's behavior isn't quite right. So we have to pay
Hmm.
more attention. And that behavior could be, um, are they, well, as you said, they're getting more irritated, but what's their appetite like?
Hmm.
They're eating more or less? What's their sleep pattern like? Are they sleeping more or less?
Hmm.
Are they doing some of their normal activities, or have they stopped doing those normal activities?
Exactly right. The fancy word in psychology is apathy or apathetic. So it's really just kind of losing interest in things that were once pleasurable. So all of those things, absolutely right, that we have to be mindful of. I guess going back to the suicide um, discussion, there are some behaviors that can be indicative of that. So maybe extreme isolation. Again, I tell my students that as people, we are relational beings. So when people are alone, we all want to be by ourselves to kind of just have some peace. And I totally get that. But to always be by yourself, that is not typical. That is not normal. That's not what most people do. And those coupled with other things could be indications that maybe a person might be considering suicidal ideation and all those other concerns. But again, in young people, maybe adolescents or even young adults, it's things like giving away my possessions. So you can have my favorite Letterman jacket, you can have my iPad or my iPhone, because I won't need this in a couple of days, so I won't be here. So things like that. This all or nothing tunnel vision thinking, again, overlapping with depression as well. But certainly those are the indications that we want to look for. Not making plans for the future, just not having anything to look forward to, and people verbalizing that, expressing that, certainly can be very, very telling, not only of suicide necessarily, but certainly that there might be some underlying mental health difficulty that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I don't know if you know Brandon Johnson, but he is based in Baltimore, Maryland, and was having a conversation with him recently. He um, is a suicide and violence prevention expert advocate, and he talked about this very thing of like no plans for the future, or not even seeing that you will be here
Mm-hmm.
5 years from now, 3 years from now, 1 year from now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, this sense, and he deals mainly with young adults and teens
Mm-hmm.
that, I'm not going to be here because of the way the world is. So, what's the use?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
That hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. So we've talked kind of around the spectrum and some things that if we were getting these annual mental health checkups, like what that would look like.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, I'm gonna need your help, Charles. Help me.
Yeah,
Where do we navigate?
I think
This is
another
a
thing.
tough topic for me. It really
Sure,
is.
sure. I think another thing that's important is that when people um, indicate how they feel, we take them seriously. So I
Mm,
think, we have a tendency to maybe downplay, because maybe it's uncomfortable to hear. But when people are expressing, whatever feeling, and it might not be what you think about that person, still take them seriously enough to believe that what they're saying, again, like I said before, is real to them. Might not be real to you, but it's real to them, and try to point them in the direction of getting some help. So I'm not here to advocate that you become, the answer, or you become the therapist, the counselor, but to take them seriously, that, my friend, my spouse, my coworker, my child is experiencing these difficulties, or I have these concerns, or they're expressing, some things that might be a bit, uncomfortable. Take that seriously. And it's always better to err on the side of caution than to overlook it and there really be something that needs to be addressed. So a couple of things I want to share about that. As again a school psychologist, I do believe that schools are a great place to start,
mhm,
just to start to get information. There's school counselors in most schools. There's a school psychologist in a lot of schools, school social workers. So for those of you who may have children or loved ones, family members, kindergarten through 12th grade, I always advocate for starting with your school. Someone there is going to be able to point you in the right direction. Part of that job is it could be figuring out a referral to another community-based agency that could support, the mental health needs of your child, friend, loved one. After that, for adults, I also think that starting with your primary care provider is also very, very important or very helpful. And they can also make referrals to other providers, psychologists, counselors, therapists, to support those mental health needs of the individual. So sometimes where you start might not be the place for the ultimate treatment, but at least they can point you in the right direction to start, kind of getting some clarity on what you're feeling. Many faith-based groups also have connections to community organizations that can provide, adequate follow up. One of the things that I guess concerns me that I've thought about more, through my training. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
my father is a minister. My grandfather was a minister for a very long time. So I understand this idea of, maybe as Black people or people of faith, well, I go to my deacon, I go to my pastor, I go to my, priest with my difficulties. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but many times those individuals don't have the training to really adequately help you or help us with whatever we are struggling with. So as you're praying, as you're, kind of putting your faith system into play, you can also talk to a therapist. You can also talk to someone who is qualified to kind of help you navigate those waters. And I've learned that a lot of faith-based organizations also have mechanisms in place to refer folks to professionals who have more skill, more training, um, to really support their needs more effectively. So my biggest advice in this area is really start somewhere. And again, for kids, go to their school. If it's an adult, start with their primary care. Even for kids, start with your pediatrician if they have one. And then for others, if they have some type of faith connection, starting with those organizations. For those of you who work, and you do have insurance and benefits, start with your benefits person, your HR person. They may have employee assistance programs that do provide a number of sessions. So there are avenues out there. And I know that the topic was about suicide, but I really feel that we can prevent a lot of suicide if we do better treatment of mental health difficulty. Again, that doesn't just happen one day, but people are struggling, you know, for a while oftentimes and have not gotten the right support, right, treatment, medication, all those things to kind of lead down that path of suicide. So supporting suicide is really first about supporting adequate mental health.
Absolutely. So just to kind of wrap it around a little bit,
Yeah.
um, I mean, before we even kind of started talking about that, um, it was noticing behaviors,
Hmm.
changes, coping skills,
Hmm.
taking them serious when they say they want to, hurt themselves.
Correct.
Um, and when they tell you about how they're feeling, and then starting with if it's a youth, the school, or for adults with or school or pediatrician for youth, but primary care physician, faith-based groups, HR person at work. Maybe there's an employee assistance program. So
Hmm.
those are some definite ways that we can help support someone.
Correct. I would say that with suicide, I think this was mentioned earlier, but the more so I guess there are degrees of severity with suicide ideation. So a person talking about suicide compared to a person who's has a plan about how they would engage in that behavior. And then there's the level of have I attempted, this suicidal behavior. The more the person engages, or the further along from the thought or the ideation to a plan to attempts, that's obviously much more serious, much more significant.
Hmm.
So part of what happens in it could be hospitals or ERs or community-based, county-based services, is what we call suicide assessments or risk assessments or suicide screening, and those are the types of questions that are often asked, by a trained provider to help identify what level of risk is this person experiencing and how should they be supported. And depending on that outcome, it could be emergency hospitalization. It could be, just all types of kind of things out there. But let's say that the person has some ideation, no clear plan, no real intent, no prior attempts, all those things. It could be the person, goes home. One of the things that happens in those situations excuse me, is what we call safety planning.
Mhm.
You might be, the parent or guardian, you might be a loved one, spouse, but really making the environment safe so they don't have access to lethal means of harming themselves. So it could be taking all the knives out the house for those who may have, firearms, having those locked and out of access, so those types of practical things. If there are pills around, all those things are removed so the person has no access to harm themselves. Those are the kind of practical things as a friend, a layperson, that you can do if you know of someone who is struggling with suicide, or suicidal ideation.
Absolutely. I actually kind of went through that with a supporter of the show,
Hmm.
and we actually kind of talked through that with someone, a safety plan where we asked if they if the person we asked the person if they felt like they weren't going to be safe,
Hmm.
was there someone that they could call and would they agree to call that person,
Hmm. Hmm.
whether or not it was a relative or a loved one, or one of the resources that we provided,
Hmm.
a counseling center, or here we have 211 Big Bend, which they have they're like a clearinghouse for all types of human services, but
Hmm.
counseling services in particular. So that was my first time ever doing that, but I thought, this is really this gets people thinking about, at least I think, um, going through that exercise, me keeping myself safe, even if that's me keeping myself safe from myself,
Hmm.
you know?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, it's a very important part, and I think again a good provider, whoever did the risk assessment or screening, is going to also help you as a supporter or a friend, colleague, kind of walk through that process as well. But that's a very tangible, very practical way that I think we can support people who are wrestling, struggling with suicidal thoughts, ideation.
Absolutely. So we have two questions from Mr. John.
Sure.
Is there a chance that suicide is hereditary?
Great question. I don't have evidence of that. I would say again, going back to the precursor of suicide, that mental health conditions can have a genetic component to it. And whenever we say that, it's never meant to say that, well, if my mom had depression or my dad had depression, then I will have this condition as well. It simply means that the person might be more predisposed or more at risk for that, but it doesn't mean that in all cases family history produces or causes that same condition. So I have not heard of suicidal behavior being hereditary, but I would consider, like many things, if you're in an environment and that has been the reality through family members, cousins, siblings, whoever, then I do think you have been placed at risk for that behavior. But it doesn't mean that it's kind of passed down in the gene pool. But it's certainly the combination of some genetics for mental health difficulty, like many other conditions, you know, other medical situations, could kind of predispose people to the mental health condition. But um, I would think about if there's some pattern or some kind of consistency. I would think about the extent to which environmental influences. So I've seen this. This is how my uncle dealt with it, how my cousin dealt with it. It doesn't mean that it's really a hereditary issue, but more maybe the exposure and what that person was seeing in their environment. But it's a great question. I think there's some truth to that for sure. With again, the genetic component.
Right. So Marie is also asking kind of a follow up. Mental health disorders could be hereditary, correct?
They can place you more at risk, but I don't
Mhm.
want anyone to think that they necessarily will have a condition because someone in their family did.
Mhm.
You might be more likely than someone who does not have that condition in their bloodline or in their family. I think about my own family, in which diabetes is on both sides, mom's side and dad's side. So
Mhm.
I am now placed at risk for also developing maybe type 2 diabetes if I'm not careful with, health, you know, diet and exercise and all those things. I am more at risk because of the presence of that condition on both sides of my family compared to someone who does not have a family history of diabetes. So I see it in the same way that if there's a history of anxiety, depression, other conditions, you may be more at risk, but it doesn't mean that you will inherit, that condition because someone else in your family had it.
Right. All right. John also wanted to know, is the Baker Act effective?
Can you refresh my memory on the Baker Act?
So Baker Act, and I'm really gonna be paraphrasing here, but typically it's when you're harm you are are potentially a harm to yourself or others,
Hmm.
and they basically kind of take you for a timeout.
Hmm. So you're committed to a facility? Is that what?
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
for certain, I think it's like 48 or 72 hours, something like that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I would say that those thresholds are pretty high for a person to be involuntarily committed, again, against their will. Um, so it certainly happens if there's, a probable reason that the person is a threat to themselves or to others. But I know that I've seen, again, kids, adolescents, maybe high school, where we felt that they are not safe and they have not been committed, or it doesn't rise to a threshold where whatever governing authority or governing body would say that this person needs to be committed to the ER or committed to a facility. So I don't know if it's effective or not. I know it happens, but I don't have much experience to know whether or not it's beneficial because it does seem like a pretty significant threshold that a person can be, again, involuntarily committed based on the potential for harming themselves or others.
Okay. No, thank you for that. So I know we've been talking around, how someone can support a loved one or someone that is considering suicide. What about support for that person who is trying to be the support?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that everyone needs to be supported because it can become exhausting. It can become overwhelming and, invested emotionally and all those things. So I would certainly encourage the person to the best of their ability to also seek counseling for themselves. I've learned as a psychologist that you listen to people and you kind of support them through their moments of difficulty or stress or frustration, challenge, um, and it can become heavy to take on other people's concerns, and that has to go somewhere. And that somewhere is not always, your girlfriend or your boyfriend, your spouse, your partner, whomever, but it has to go somewhere for you to healthily process that. So I do think as you're kind of being the support, the caregiver, the provider of someone who's experiencing mental health difficulty and or suicidal ideation, that you also identify some support groups for yourself to also be mindful of your own mental health. There's a term that's typically applied to professionals, but it can apply here too, called compassion fatigue, and it just basically means that the exhaustion that comes from being the person who's taking care of other people's when they're in a vulnerable state. So definitely I would encourage you to kind of keep up your own mental health and wellness, be that moments of quiet reflection and meditation. That could be prayer for some people. That could be taking a walk in nature, just getting outside, getting some good old fashioned vitamin D,
Mhm.
just kind of unplugging. I've been telling people for a while now, every single day, everyone needs to give themselves a break by taking a break. That's all. You just have to make time to take a break every single day, and you don't have to earn that break. I
Mhm.
work for 10 minutes, and then you deserve it by virtue of being a person. So I would encourage everyone that you still have to balance your own. The term self care is so overused, but your own mental health and wellness, as you're caring for others. And sometimes, again, those same folks, hospitals, faith groups, community based services, they have support groups for individuals that could benefit from that as they're caring for their loved ones.
Yeah, no, very, very good points. You know, since the pandemic and us being socially distanced and
Mhm.
uh, sitting in place and sitting with ourselves, and I think consuming a lot of screen time, um, and not even with the telehealth,
Mhm.
and it serves its place, but there's just nothing like being in the presence of, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
So, these are all things that we've had to contend with and are still contending with to some extent, because
Mhm.
now we're on Zoom and Teams and Skype and, you
It's
know,
exhausting.
yeah, it
It's
is.
exhausting. I would say this. I was thinking a couple days ago, and if you don't like how you're feeling, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but I really want you to think about um, what are you doing? Like, what's your daily routine like? And I know we all scroll on Facebook, scroll Instagram, Twitter. It's kind of become a part of life. But that can become tiring. Um, Certainly, all the blue light from screens is not healthy. You have on the blue light glasses and all that kind of stuff. But just kind of always consuming that. Although some folks do that to unwind and kind of just relax before bed or whatever, get it. But really think about unplugging from that stuff as well, because that also can become heavy,
Hmm.
in your day to day, and sometimes that's kind of a big part of it. So just try it. Try what those try seeing what life would be if you did not engage as much. And I'm talking to myself because I'm on stuff all the time. Uh, for a lot of it's kind of a way of life, want to build a brand and have a presence on social media. Totally get it, and I'm not knocking those things, but they also come with a cost.
Hmm.
And sometimes that cost is just, well, why am I so sluggish? Why am I so tired? I've just
Hmm.
noticed the last couple of nights not having the TV on, I sleep better. Uh,
Hmm.
just small things like that can be very helpful for your overall functioning.
Nice. No, again, great point. And as you say those things, you're saying them to me as well,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
I too am very guilty of that whole,
Mm,
watching the screens, um, for various sundry things, whether that's checking emails or sending text messages or, being on social or whatnot. So definitely, unplugging or at least attempting to unplug,
mm,
especially towards the end of the day when you're trying to wind down and get ready to rest. So,
yeah.
hmm all right. Well, anything else that you think would be something that we want to highlight as it relates to how we can support someone considering
Mhm.
suicide? I'm gonna do a recap. So, talked
Yeah.
about noticing behavior changes and coping skills. What are their coping skills? Taking them serious when they say they want to hurt themselves. Um, Looking to schools, doctors' offices, patient, I'm sorry, faith-based groups,
Mhm.
HR at work, um, developing a safety plan, which would include removing access to weapons or things that could be used to hurt themselves, and getting them to commit to contacting someone if they feel like they are in danger.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I want to share this one thing, and this is a recent for me, maybe the last couple of years or so. But I want to, again, such a taboo subject in so many different, communities, groups. This issue of suicide, but I'm really um, committed to not blaming people for their situations. I don't believe that anyone desires to kill themselves or to die by suicide.
Hmm.
And when that happens, I firmly believe it's a consequence, um, in most cases, of larger, overwhelming mental health difficulty.
Hmm.
So, if you know someone who has died by suicide and contemplating suicide, maybe my biggest take home is that they really deserve compassion, help, support, treatment, not condemnation. And I think I'm speaking now from my faith based perspective or background, that I don't believe that when people die by suicide, that is some type of ultimate sin.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's just my perspective as a person of faith, but also as a psychologist. I've really been thinking about that, knowing what I was taught, what I was exposed to as a kid, and I've revised a lot of that, just kind of knowing that that's an overwhelming feeling, and I don't believe it's inconsistent with the need for grace or for patience and all those things that people are deserving of. So I just want to encourage people that again, we're all growing and we're all evolving in our understanding of this, but really, um, I've gotten to a place where that act or behavior or decision is difficult. It's traumatic to say that I'm going to go through and do this to myself. And I don't believe, again, in most cases, people don't desire to harm themselves, and what that could mean again for their overall mental health functioning. So I just wanted to share that because I know it's a loaded, topic and issue for many people, and we don't talk about it enough. But as we tell students, talking about suicide is not going to give people permission to die by suicide. And so I'm not planting any ideas, in people's heads tonight. Just talking about this very real, issue in society. But coupled with, just wanting to encourage you that, you know, um, it's not you per se, but I also want to encourage people to really seek out their systems of support in whatever setting that might be appropriate based on them or you yourself or your age, to really not even get to a point where suicide is being contemplated. And I do think we can do a much better job at that by really promoting mental health and wellness.
Absolutely. Uh-oh. Very well said. I will say that uh, some of the things that you have mentioned, I have
Mhm,
heard in
mhm,
terms of the condemnation piece. And wonderful Lisa Abel, I think it is. She said
mhm.
condemnation would not be helpful, and it's not.
Exactly right.
Is not helping the situation. And so I think we definitely have to you know, change the thoughts around that, change the language around that as well. And like you said, showing empathy, showing compassion.
Mhm.
And, I really feel like it's a cry out for some unmet need.
Correct, correct. Just one last point.
Hmm.
We mentioned language. It prompted me to say this, that Language evolves in different settings, and even in the area of suicide, language has evolved. So we no longer say this person committed suicide. That would not be the most respectful way to refer to the individual. The idea being like, this person committed a murder or committed a crime. So now we say this person died by suicide. Again, there's a much more respectful way to refer to the individual. Not that what they did was, anything, um, like a crime, or they need to be punished for what they did. So we do try to be intentional about how we even describe suicidal events as died by suicide, not committed suicide. So we'll just leave you with that as well.
No, very good point. But that also just kind of um, jogs my thoughts around how we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
When someone dies by suicide, and how there's just a silence, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, even around maybe the funerals or the the burials and that sort of thing. It's just I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we got to do a better job about that as well. And I know, maybe folks watching may be saying like, "What do you say?" You know, I don't profess to have all of the answers, but some type of support
Mhm.
help people talk around it, and loved ones, and particularly parents, I think, that lose their children. Um,
It's a sensitive issue. It's delicate because one of the things that, again, going back to my work with children,
mhm,
unfortunately, I've responded to situations, crisis calls, where we have had students or staff die by suicide, but especially with students, the tricky dynamic that we're always trying to balance is not glorifying the suicide.
mhm,
So balancing being respectful and allowing children and individuals to process their grief and their emotions, without promoting this activity that kids think, well, if I do this, then I get all this attention. People are talking about me, and all these things happen. At my school, I'm kind of the hero. So it definitely is a balancing act that we don't want to just simply ignore that it happened, but at the same time not glorify the act of suicide, and what that could lead to some other unintended consequences.
absolutely. Misha just joined us. Thanks for being here, Misha. She said, "What support is available for survivors of attempted suicide in their family?"
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it depends on a number of factors, of course, age and all those things, but where that person is kind of receiving their services. So certainly, I would say continued counseling and those types of interventions to continue to work through, the risk factors or the things that were precursors to the suicide would
Mhm,
definitely be helpful. Sometimes some family dynamics or family systems therapy could be helpful.
mhm,
Not only individual therapy, for the person who attempted suicide, but certainly that there could be some room for more family systems or other group dynamics. I also think about, and depending on the age of the individual, how much that ongoing support needs to be indirect in terms of empowering or providing parents and other adults with skills to help support, their child. So because the reasons that may have led to suicide are so vast, it's hard to say what exactly that is. But depending on whatever the concern was that might have led the person to feel that suicide was their only answer, I do think continuing with kind of processing, that situation, or addressing, the anxiety, the depression, sometimes issues of identity, and just so many things that can play into that. Continuing to work through those and empowering people to how they can be supportive, of individuals can be very helpful, even after the attempt.
Absolutely. I will also offer up NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which
Yes.
is one of the nation's largest grassroots mental health organizations.
Hmm.
While they don't do counseling, they do offer support for um, loved ones, family members, and also survivors of attempted suicide. So they have offices across the country. So you can, there's one here in Tallahassee.
Hmm.
So you can find those groups. Just go online and find a location near you. All
Absolutely.
right. Yeah. Janae said we spend a lot of time on social media. There are tons of support groups on Facebook with various issues.
Hmm.
Yep. Yep.
I would just, Janae, thank you for that. I would just offer this just as a psychologist that yes, support groups can be very, very helpful, very, very beneficial. I
Mhm.
would just say that just be mindful that some of those support groups might not be governed by any or facilitated by anyone with any credentials or training. And sometimes, when those things are in place or not in place, I should say, they could cause more harm than good.
Yeah.
So just be mindful of all these, chat rooms and different groups that people mean well. I don't think people intend to be harmful,
Right.
but just be mindful that some of those groups have, no training whatsoever
Mhm.
um, for their leaders, and people just kind of sharing their information and talking could be good, but it's also could not be good. So just be mindful of that with those informal groups on Facebook. But
Absolutely.
thank you for
No.
your comment.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles. All right. So we have run a little bit over our regular time, but that's okay. This is a needful conversation. So I am going to wrap this up, but ask how can folks connect with you?
Yes, certainly. So on Instagram at Charles A. Barrett, that's Barrett. Facebook at underscore Charles. I'm sorry, Twitter at underscore Charles Barrett. Again, Barrett. And then Facebook, just Charles Barrett. You'll see me and my wife in the picture. And so you find me LinkedIn, same thing, Charles Barrett. The website, thank you very much. That's Instagram right there.
Okay.
Perfect. The
Okay.
website is www.charlesbarrett.org. And the last thing I want you to do, I want you to download free, totally free, the Charles Barrett app. Go to the App Store or Google Play and just type in Charles Barrett. You'll see my initials come up. Thank you for that, Nicole. But yeah, download the Charles Barrett app. And when you get to the app, there's a way that you can subscribe to a daily notification, 8 a.m. Eastern. Um, 8 a.m. Eastern, I send you a daily encouragement, inspiration for you, right to your phone, your device, iPad, whatever. So, Charles Barrett app in the App Store and Google Play,
Love
totally
it.
free. And I want to encourage you every single morning.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
got Dr. Anika Fields on. She is the director of the Counseling Center at the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. And she says sometimes we are so afraid to talk to our friends and family when we believe they may be considering dying by suicide for fear they just might do it.
That is true, but I want to encourage you to talk anyway. I
Mhm.
think talking is one thing, but also as you're talking, certainly as you know for sure, is that connecting them to resources, connecting them to support, and depending on who they are, those resources and support can look like can be manifested in different ways. So thank you for your
Absolutely.
comment as well.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this has been quite informative. Hopefully, folks have benefited from this. We've got to keep this conversation going. So please, y'all, tag a friend, share this. This video will live on the Conversations with Nicole YouTube channel, as well as on Greater Works Network on Roku, so folks can watch it on demand at their leisure. But let's keep this going, because we really need to continue having these types of talks and getting the word out and knowing what the signs are, what to look out for and be mindful of, and checking in and going to get those checkups from the neck up. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you, Charles, so much. We're
Ooh,
gonna have to have you come back and share some of the great things that you're doing.
absolutely.
All right, good deal. And I definitely invite you all who have not done so already to subscribe to the Conversations with Nicole YouTube channel, as well as, if you have a Roku TV, add Greater Works Network as a channel option, or we also have a free app on for iPhone and for Android. So we do have a show scheduled for Monday. Let me see. What is my topic on Monday? Hold on, y'all. Bear with me for a moment. Oh, Satara. I can't remember what it is right now, but Satara Carr, who used to live here, she's in Jacksonville now. She'll be the guest. So you all stay tuned. It's going to be good. All right. Thanks again, Charles.
Thank you.
Thanks again, viewers, and we will see y'all next time.
All right. Good night.
Good night.